Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today we're going to be talking about the coaching carousel that has come to a screeching halt because all 8 head coaches have finally signed, and we're going to be heading into the offseason. Joe and I are here to give our reactions and what we think could be happening for these teams as we examine their outlooks heading into the offseason.
Hike!
So, Joe, let's first talk about the New England Patriots. Jerod Mayo has now been in succession to be the head coach. Bill Belichick is no longer there. They were 4-13 last year. They got a good amount of cap space. They got $66 million in cap space, and they've got a first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round pick. Most of them their picks. They have Bears' 7th round pick. Joe, what are your thoughts, about the Patriots heading into this offseason? What should we expect from them? What would be a successful offseason?
I think a successful offseason for them is just be trying to – I think they should use some of that money, try to, get a free agent wide receiver, try to get some more weapons for this offense, mainly obviously in the draft. I think they'll end up using that first-round pick at pick number 3 on a quarterback, which – they really need to do. Mac Jones, Zappy, they currently don't have a guy to move forward with at quarterback. So I think they draft the quarterback and really think they need to just use some of that money and get some talent into this offense.
Yeah, I got to say I'm a little concerned for Patriots fans out there. I know Jerod Mayo has a very high credibility. Seems that people say that he's born to be a coach. He's going to be really good. I think he could struggle out of the gate. I don't know if they'll start that rookie right away. Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi have been pretty poor. It seems it might just be what we've seen of the same of Bill Belichick. That's the thing. I don't know if all the picks that Belichick has had in the past, all the moves that they've made. Maybe Jerod Mayo will have a certain spin that is his, that he'll want to change things up. But I think for the most part, I think we might see a lot of the same of how the Patriots have been managed over these past 2 years.
I'm not so sure that we will. I think Mayo's really just going to bring an influx of new energy. And, I think maybe with some new ideas and what to do with the picks. I mean, Bill Belichick was just terrible at his draft picks. Outside of, he was good in the later rounds. But as far as getting, early round talent, I mean, he could never draft a decent wide receiver, even though they tried. Or even after, Gronkowski, they really struggled to get a tight end into the offense as well. So I think some new ideas will be good for the team. And I think Mayo, with his influx of, new energy and just breaking up some of the things in New England, could be good for that team.
I'm with you, though. Quarterback is definitely going to be the move of 3. I'd be pretty shocked if that's not the case.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he could have a similar type impact of D'Amico Ryans into that team.
I don't believe it, but we'll find out. How about the Las Vegas Raiders? They had interim coach Antonio Pierce, decided to hire him full-time. He's going to be, it'll be interesting. He was 8-9, full overall, the Raiders were. And they have $36 million in cap space. They have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and 3 sevenths. Joe, they've got the draft capital, kind of in the middle rounds. They're kind of in limbo. With this team, don't really have a quarterback for the future. At 13, it might be too late. What do you think happens with the Raiders? I know, interestingly, Luke Getsy was just recently named the offensive coordinator. Many felt that he was kind of a failure in Chicago, and now he gets the job over for the Raiders. What are your thoughts for the Raiders? What's going to be a good offseason for them?
Yeah, well, I think they made the right choice with Antonio Pierce. I really think he could be the right guy. Over the 9 games that he took over, he was 5-4 as the interim head coach. And I think the Raiders made a mistake years ago by not bringing back Rich Bisaccia when he took over. Players in the locker room really loved him. Same impact with Antonio Pierce, like that they're keeping him. But as you mentioned, Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator, it's a little peculiar to me. You're looking at a guy like Cliff Kingsbury. They don't want to give him the 3rd year, so things don't really work out. He goes on to another team that we'll be talking about later, and you end up with Luke Getsy, who, like you said, I mean, people had their concerns and questions about what he did with Chicago and Justin Fields as the quarterback. So kind of wondering, if the Raiders decide to go with a, rookie quarterback in this draft as well, whether it's their first pick at 13 or, maybe one of their picks in the second and third rounds, if he's going to be the guy to develop one of these rookie guys.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, you got Kirk Cousins, a possible free agent quarterback. Do they try to pry away Baker Mayfield from Tampa Bay? I don't know. I don't know what options they have out there. I do like that they brought in Marvin Lewis as an assistant coach. I know you think it's the right move. I think it was not the right move. Although the players, I think it was a tough position, for Mark Davis because the players really wanted him. So I feel like he had to. I think his hands were tied. I think who he really should have got is Jim Harbaugh, even though maybe Harbaugh wasn't wanting to go there. And the reality is you're going to see Harbaugh two times during the season, and I think it could look pretty ugly.
Yeah, I think if there was a chance for them to get Harbaugh, they would have made a harder push. There was rumors that Mark Davis and Harbaugh have a connection. I just think he knew that if Harbaugh went to the NFL, it was going to be the Chargers. If they would have fired Staley last year, Harbaugh would have been the coach of the Chargers last year. So I just don't think that was an option. So that's why I think of the other options that they had. Sticking with Antonio Pierce, I like the move. And then to your point, Antonio Pierce, inexperienced guy. Bring on a guy like Marvin Lewis with all that experience as a head coach. People always question him for not winning the big game, but with the Bengals, they were always consistent and always had, a decent record.
Yeah, I like that move a lot. I think that's going to create some, sustainability for them. So I really like that move. Head over to the Tennessee Titans, who I think probably have the most surprising head coaching hire of this cycle. They were 6-11 last year. They went ahead and hired Brian Callahan, the former offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. They got a whopping $68.1 million in cap space. Rand Carthan, the second-year GM, really can decide to spend how he wants to. Should be interesting to see. They've signed guys like DeAndre Hopkins in the last offseason. I think this team is in a rebuild mode. Sounds like they're saying they're excited to work with Will Levis. I think that remains to be seen. They have a first, second, fourth, fifth, sixth, and 2 7s, and that first round pick, is number 7. So, Joe, what do you think is going to happen here for the Titans? What is your outlook for them, and what's going to be a good offseason for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think Callahan was an interesting hire, but he had been rumored for last coaching carousel as well. People like his, young mind and what he was going through with Cincinnati. But for the Titans, it's going to be really interesting. You mentioned it seems like Will Levis is going to be a quarterback, but what is life going to be like after Derrick Henry for the Titans? I don't expect him to be back. What is his offense going to look like? Will they be passing the ball more? Does he, like what kind of Zach Taylor's doing to the Bengals and pass the ball more? Or do they kind of take the approach that they had when Jake Browning was in there and do a little bit more with the running game and play action off of it? It'll be interesting. I don't know really what to expect from, the offense. I do know they got to make upgrades amongst the offensive line. Tennessee Titans had one of the worst offensive lines. So if they're going to go with Levis at number 7, it's a great opportunity for them to get a tackle. Offensive line, it's a good class for offensive tackles. So I think that's the first and main concern with all that cap space they do have.
I was going to make the same point that offensive line's in shambles. It should be interesting. We've talked about this in the past. Who is really the brains behind the operation? When Cincinnati, they've had a really good offense for so long. Was it really Brian Callahan that really, made this offense go, or was it Zach Taylor? Do they kind of lose a step with him not being there anymore? I don't know. I'm feeling like the Titans are going to be a bottom dweller for a little while. Like you got the Texans and the Colts that are surging. Jacksonville's kind of mediocre at this point. I don't know. Tennessee's going to have – this is going to be a long rebuild, I think, for them.
Yeah, it definitely could, especially, moving on from Vrabel. It seemed like he wanted to get out of there, but Vrabel would always seem to do more with less, with this team, and they always seem to be really competing. I just have concerns about, what this team's going to look like with a new guy, and offensive guy at the helm here.
Yeah, I think it could be ugly. We talked about last year how I thought they might be the worst roster in football. You thought they might win. I think primarily because of Vrabel's coaching, they would be the division winner. I think this team, we could be looking at this team possibly having the number 1 pick next year, I believe, but we'll see.
Interesting.
So going over to our next team, we've got the LA Chargers. The former Michigan man, Jim Harbaugh, after winning the national championship, is going to LA, where he played formerly as a quarterback there. They went 5-12 under Brandon Staley, and they have negative $45.8 million in cap space. So Jimbo is going to have to do some reworking of the cap space there. As far as draft picks go, he's got a top 5 pick. He's got the 5th overall, but he also has a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 2 7ths. One of them is a comp pick. Joe, what do you think is going to happen here for these LA Chargers? We've seen Harbaugh back in San Fran. It was a while ago since he was there. There's some aging guys on that team, such as guys like Khalil Mack, Austin Eckler. Don't know how much longer they're going to be on the team. This team could look, pretty different than what we've seen in the past few years.
Yeah, I definitely think this team's going to look a lot different. Obviously with the cap issues that they have, Jim Harbaugh said Keenan Allen's going to be back, but it's going to be hard to bring all these old guys, older veterans back. I don't think they're going to be able to bring Eckler back. Khalil Mack's probably gone, and I think Jim Harbaugh's really going to focus on getting his guys in there. He's got a culture to change, and he does that through tough physical football and being disciplined, which is not something that the Chargers have been about. So he's got to rework this roster, kind of rebuild it to get his type of guys in there. And I think with the number 5 pick, I'd expect them to go with Brock Bowers.
I find it interesting with Greg Roman coming as the offensive coordinator. I feel like people do not like Roman very much. What he did with Lamar in Baltimore. I mean, he's had some good years, but it's just one of those things where they have a relationship. So it makes sense. And Roman, was a potential head coaching candidate at the time, however many years ago when he was the offensive coordinator back in San Francisco. Should be very interested to see how Herbert and that offense looks.
I think Roman's a perfect fit for Harbaugh. Harbaugh likes to run the ball, play action after it. And that was the one, criticism really people had with Lamar Jackson, and just not him being able to correctly handle the athlete that Jackson was, and letting him pass. But I think Romans and Jim Harbaugh's, as far as offensive philosophy, mesh pretty well, and I think they're going to have a pretty good marriage there.
So our next coach here is Dave Canales going to the Carolina Panthers. They went 2-15. They were the worst team in the NFL. They have $20.5 million in cap space. And as far as their draft picks goes, they don't have the number 1 pick, but they do have the 2nd round pick, number 33 overall, a 3rd rounder, a 4th, 2 5ths, and a 6th. Joe, Panthers are really in rough shape. You think Dave Canales can turn it around? What do you think this team's going to do here in his first year as coach?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see, can he get the most out of Bryce Young, like we've seen him being able to get the most out of these other quarterbacks that he's had, being involved with Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, what he just did this past season with Baker Mayfield. Can he recreate some of that magic with Bryce Young? But I think it's interesting. They don't have their 1st round pick, which is unfortunate for him. Have $28.5 million in cap space, which is pretty good. But first and foremost, they need to upgrade the offensive line, but they also need to find a way to get Bryce Young some weapons. I mean, it's pretty bad when his best person to throw to last year was Adam Thielen. They've taken some younger wide receivers in the draft. They just haven't seemed to pan out thus far.
Yeah, that's got to be his number 1 move, I believe, as a head coach. And, Dan Morgan now as the GM, former linebacker of the Carolina Panthers. They really need to get Bryce Young weapons. They invested the number 1 overall pick for him. They believed in his talent. And, that regime is no longer there. So, they don't have too much ties to it, but it seems like Tepper, the owner, has ties to him and believed in him. So I think they want to make sure this pick is going to hit, and that means they have to do everything in their power to get that offense overhauled. They don't have to be a division winner. They can be still, a bottom 10 team in the league, but Bryce Young has got to take a step forward. That's why he was brought in. He's got a 6-year contract. Most likely, these coaches don't last all the way, but I can understand why he had such a long of a term, because it might take a little bit to turn it around. And if Bryce Young doesn't work, he's going to want to be able to pick his guy. I don't know if he'll have the chance. So he's got to do everything he can to get Bryce Young right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Joe. So head over to our next team. We got the Atlanta Falcons. Arthur Smith, the stash is no more at 7-10. In comes Raheem Morris, former head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have $20.5 million in cap space. They've got a first, a second, 2/3, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. And that first rounder is number 8 overall. Joe, what do you think is going to happen here for these Atlanta Falcons? What is the outlook heading into the offseason?
Well, I know the outlook for fantasy owners is potentially a lot better without the stash or Arthur Smith being involved. Everyone's excited to see, what Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson could do without Arthur Smith on the sidelines. And I'm interested to see, Zach Robinson coming over as the pass coordinator from the Rams, taking over as the OC here, what he's going to be able to do with this offense. But like these other teams, first and foremost, it's that quarterback position. What are the Falcons going to do at quarterback? Desmond Ridder just doesn't seem to be the guy. They had Heineke. There's rumors that they're possibly interested in Russell Wilson if the Broncos decide to move on from him. Do they kind of try to get one of these veteran free agents, or do they, take probably, I can't imagine they take a quarterback at 8, but do they, use their second round pick or something on take a flyer on one of these other quarterbacks that could slip out of the first round?
Yeah, I mean, Desmond Ridder can't be the guy, I don't believe. They're going to have to figure something out. They're kind of in a tough spot at 8. They're not going to be able to get probably one of the top guys unless they're going to trade up. And are they going to want to give up that much? It'll be really interesting to see what happens with this team. Morris, it's been a while since he was a coach. Was with the Rams. I thought Belichick was going there. I really did. I was really surprised to see that they opted to go with Morris instead of Belichick. But yeah, I mean, Zach Robinson, we don't know what he's going to be like. He's coming from that McVay coaching tree, so he could end up doing really well as others have before him. So be interesting to see what happens. They've got a decent amount of cap space. They've got some good offensive weapons already in hand. I think they're going to probably address the defense because that defense has been pretty lackluster.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, of the coaching carousel, I mean, this was one of the better situations to take over from a roster standpoint. The offense has some really young, exciting talent, and the defense, they could use more depth, but they have some players over there as well. And I feel like they're just really that quarterback away from being a really good competitive team in the NFC.
Well, not to mention that NFC South is the worst division in football.
Oh, right.
I mean, it's right for the taking. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers basically crawled in there to win the division. They played a lot better than I anticipated in the playoffs. I give them a lot of credit for that. Being the Eagles and almost being the Lions. But yeah, I agree. I think Morris could very well take this team to the playoffs next year.
I agree with that.
All right, Joe, then we've got the Seattle Seahawks, Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, young and promising upcoming defensive coordinator. It's coming over there, and Seahawks were 9-8 in Pete Carroll's last year. Been a long time since we've seen a different head coach for the Seattle Seahawks. And they've got negative $5.2 million in cap space. They've got a first rounder, number 16 overall, 2/3, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh. So what is your outlook here for the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by the Mike Macdonald hire. I expected them to possibly, if they're going to get rid of Pete Carroll, who, I mean, the Seahawks haven't, it's not like they were been terrible with Pete Carroll. I think he still could do it. I thought maybe they'd go a different side of the ball. Maybe go with a guy like Ben Johnson or something. But for them to go young and stay at the defensive coordinator position, I thought was an interesting move. But once again, I'm interested to see what the Seahawks are going to be able to do to address the quarterback. They can't be relying on Geno Smith to be the guy in the future. I know Drew Lock's been backing him up. Don't expect him to be back either. So I think whether it's they don't have a second round pick, which could be tough. Wonder if they got 2/3. Do they, take one or both of those and try to move back into the second round to address the quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, John Schneider's coming back as the general manager. He's been one of the most steady GMs we've seen in the NFL for quite some time. He does a really good job at drafting. But him and Pete Carroll have been in lockstep. I'm a little concerned about this head coaching hire, to be honest with you. Don't want to doubt that he's a promising defensive coordinator, but doesn't mean that they can be a head coach. I think what it is they've had the Legion of Boom. They've had a really strong defense. I think Pete Carroll has been able to get the most out of, even though he's more of a defensive-oriented coach, he's gotten the most out of guys like Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. So I'm a little bit nervous for this hire, to be honest with you. We'll see what they do, but I don't know if they have the ammunition to address the quarterback position, which is the most crucial.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised. I really thought if they're going to go defense, I really thought they were going to bring back Dan Quinn, guy connection to the organization, knew the defense, and has a rapport with Pete Carroll as he's staying in the building. And Pete Carroll's one of the most charismatic, energetic 70-plus-year-olds you're going to find. So I don't know. I'm concerned. Not all just because the guy's a great defensive coordinator doesn't mean he's going to be a great head coach. I agree. I'm concerned about Mike Macdonald in this situation with the Seahawks.
Well, and to my knowledge, Joe, the Seahawks do not have an offensive coordinator established yet, so that'll be really interesting. That's going to be a big piece of how successful they can be. We just saw that Eric Bieniemy is no longer going to be the offensive coordinator for the Commanders. I feel a lot better if he maybe ends up going over there.
Yeah, definitely. I see they also try to bring the likes of Mike Kafka. It looks like he's potentially getting blocked by the current team that employs him. So
the Giants,
that'll be interesting. But yeah, Bieniemy I feel like would be a good fit if they could somehow get him in there.
So the last team we got here is the Washington Commanders, or whoever their name's going to be if they rebrand again. And Dan Quinn's coming in. Ron Rivera, their team was 4-13, and they have a whopping $73.6 million in cap space. They've got the number 2 overall pick. They also have 2 seconds, theirs and then the Bears' second-round pick. They also have a third-round comp pick, a 4th rounder, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. So, Dan Quinn and this new front office with Adam Peters, they can really change this roster over. This seems like a pretty exciting.
They really need it too.
Oh, they do. But how do you feel about Dan Quinn as the hire? I know you really didn't want the Broncos to have him when he was possibly interviewing for the Broncos. What do you think about him, and what is the outlook here for the Commanders?
It's interesting. The media and fans don't really seem to like Dan Quinn, but whenever the quote unquote football guys talk about him, they love him as far as that aspect. It's tough. We saw him in Atlanta. He had Kyle Shanahan as offensive coordinator. He had good success there. And then really haven't seen him get the shot at a head coach position. I do think that he's more of a players coach guy. He gets the most out. It seems to get the most out of his defensive players. But I was nervous about him being the head coach. I think this Commander situation will be interesting though, because that's really the defensive side of the ball is where they need the most help. He gets Cliff Kingsbury in there, an offensive coordinator. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. Being that, they tried the experiment of Clint Kingsbury being in there. He got his guy in Kyler Murray. First 2 years, it looked great, but then kind of saw that it started not to work out. So be curious to see how a quarterback development goes with Cliff Kingsbury in there at OC.
Yeah, it sounds like when it comes to Dan Quinn, they really think from what I've heard, they're saying he's a leader of men. He just really is able to bring guys together. And you got to, you look back at it, he was very successful in his time in Atlanta. He did bring the Falcons to the Super Bowl, with Matt Ryan, and was this close to winning a Super Bowl. So, this guy, I think he kind of doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. So I think it's an interesting hire. I think there's some other names out there. I'm surprised, guys like Vrabel. Not necessarily Belichick, because Belichick wants all the control. And I could see why teams are like, why would we want to give that to you? How many more years do you have left? But Vrabel is a guy that I'm really shocked didn't get the hire and decided to give the nod to Quinn. Yeah,
I'm really surprised Vrabel didn't get one. He just, like we keep talking about, he always did more with less in Tennessee, has that competitive team. I guess the one thing that scared me with Dan Quinn is you keep mentioning everyone calls him a leader of men. Well, they said the same thing about Vance Joseph, and he was absolutely terrible as the head coach of the Broncos. So maybe that's what scared me off in terms of that. But also with the Falcons, this will really tell. He had a great offensive coordinator, Kyle Shanahan, controlling the offense to your point, and Matt Ryan. How much of it was Dan Quinn and his coaching, or having a offensive mind like Kyle Shanahan run that offense with Matt Ryan?
Right, which obviously we see how good of an offensive mind Kyle Shanahan is.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. Do the Commanders possibly see if they can't switch with the Bears to go number one and get Caleb Williams? There was obviously Caleb Williams and Cliff Kingsbury. He coached. They have coached over at USC, so there's some symmetry there. I don't know. I actually feel like Caleb did worse under Cliff Kingsbury. In my view. So I don't really know if you'd really want that, because I think what he was 2 years ago is better than what he was this past year.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying, with Kingsbury and Kyler, who we had a connection with as well. Just that sustained success wasn't there. It'd be interesting. The real telltale, I guess, will be, if that's going to happen, is all of a sudden, does Caleb Williams just refuse to play for the Bears if they take him? The rumors and speculations out there, but does he actually pull an Eli Manning or a John Elway type of move here?
That would be crazy. We haven't seen one of those in a long time, but it's not out of the question. I mean, he seems like a type of guy who, based on everything we've heard in the media, he will not mince words. And if he doesn't want to go somewhere, there was all the rumors that he might not declare for the draft if he doesn't like the team who's at number one. So, whether that was hearsay or what have you, if there's any, oomph behind what he has to say. But Commanders, they are a very interesting team. I think they have a lot of opportunity to reshape this roster. They've got the cap space. They've got, the number 2 overall pick. They could get at least one of these quarterbacks and really start to see, what could come with this team. I think this team could be a surpriser here in 2024.
Yeah, I think they definitely could. And I mean, they're I always feel like the NFC East is always up for grabs too. I mean, at any given point, if they could really turn this thing around, they got the cap space, they got the draft capital, and if Dan Quinn's really the leader of men that they say he is, he could get this thing turned around. They have all the resources to, and they have some offensive pieces. The biggest question is that defense, but he's the defensive guy to get that done.
So that does it for our NFL coaching carousel. Like we said, the carousel has come to a screeching halt. All the teams have their head coaches, and now we're planning for the offseason. If you enjoy off-season content, this is the place to be, because we do videos all throughout the year, including the off-season. We do 3 videos a week. So if you haven't supported us yet, we would greatly appreciate if you hit that subscribe button to show your support. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.